Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Friday training. And you're going to have a treat today because we have our CEO, Signage, chiming in as well. And Michelle is going to touch on the LOI, which is very important element in the commercial real estate. So hope you have a good time. So Michelle, take it over. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. This is a great training session today. We are going to be covering commercial lease LOIs on a modified gross, or it could be a triple net. Those are the most common around here. So since there's so much in the commercial arena to cover, we'll keep it on the commercial lease agreement, commercial LOI for today, leasing. Okay, so this is just a draft of the letter of the LOI. So you usually put it on letterhead. We do have some letterhead that you can put on your computers that has the commercial logos for Coldwell Banker George Realty. You know, you date it, address it to the landlord, tell them what this is. And usually you're going to let the landlord know a little bit in your first paragraph about your client. So in this case, this is just a made-up LOI that Shumei and I put together. It's Chef Sam Smith of XYZ Eatery. He's an experienced operator for restaurants, and he has a 20-year career. Now, what you're going to do with this LOI is also attach a brief resume or synopsis of your client. So it's, you know, stronger for you when you're presenting. So now you go right into the terms. So one thing I want to say about LOIs is these are non-binding. You'll see the paragraph at the back. So, you know, try to make it as good as you can, but don't be afraid. If you've missed something, just reread it and you can correct that, because this is a non-binding. It's a way to kick off the negotiations. So the terms offered, you're always going to state the site address, and if there was a suite number, you would put it here as well. You want to let them know about the business use. So this, in this case, it's a restaurant, and the name of the business. Sometimes it could be a TBD because they may not have established the name of the restaurant yet. Or in this case, we have XYZ Eatery. So type of lease, we are on a modified gross lease. So what does that mean? The tenant pays base rent plus a portion of the operating costs. You'll see CAM fee, which is common area maintenance fee. So those will be laid into this LOI later on the second page, and you'll see that. So the tenant pays base rent plus a portion of the operating costs. The landlord pays another portion, other portions of the operating costs. Bear in mind that modified gross lease agreements can vary, and the division of the obligations is who's paying what vary from lease to lease. So make sure that you are checking that out and understand that. But on an LOI, we're just stating the initial terms that the tenant is seeking. So the term of this lease that the chef would like is 5 years, and he would like 1 5-year option to renew. Always put the commencement date. So in this case, he wants to commence July 1, 2022. So you always put the approximate square foot of the unit because it's not going to always, you know, be exact, but it's approximately 1,200 square feet. Put your base rental rate that you're offering. Your base rental rate we're offering here is $3 per square foot. $3,600 per month. And you always want to put both, because in a lot of the commercial arena, they're looking at a cost per square foot. So we like to put both, the $3 and then what that totals. The CAM fee, your common area maintenance fee, is 50 cents per square foot or $600 a month. So your total monthly rent on this unit is $4,200 a month. Now we've came in, tried to be strong on this, and we're offering a security deposit of $8,400, which is the equivalent to the base rent CAM fee times 2. So normally you want to come in, I've seen people coming in with 1 month A lot of times, even if the client, and Shumei's going to address all the questions at the end, even if the client has really good credit, the landlord would like 2 months, cushion here. So if you want to come out strong, it's good to come in at 2 times. So your rental increase, you do want to address this because it could be CPI or 4% annually. And we structured this whichever is less, because as you know, it's somewhere hovering, probably, I haven't looked it up today, but it could be 7 to 8%. So what is the CPI? It's the consumer price index, and many leases will refer to a rental increase in CPI, and that's how they make the adjustment. So when the CPI is high, which it is right now, you want to try to cap that. So you want to cap that for your client if you're representing the tenant. So make sure that it's CPI or whatever cap you're going to put here annually, and state in it whichever is less. Okay, because you don't want your client getting an 8% increase because they just went straight CPI if they weren't prepared. That is a fluctuating annual rate. So I say 8% this year, it could be 6% next year. And if it goes really low, it could be 5% or less. But just make sure you're capping that rental increase. Don't leave that wide open for your client. Okay, so rental abatement. Now, why would this be in here? Because most landlords are going to give some free rent or rental abatement so that the client can prepare the unit. So you never want to give them free rent or rental abatement in the first month. And the reason why is when we collect the money on this lease, we want that first month in. We want to get that in the landlord's pocket. So we never offer the first month as free. Let's say they started, mid-month, like we have one that it will be starting June 15th, for instance. So what we have structured in our lease, not our LOI, but our lease, is we're taking that whole 6 months worth of rental payment, and then the next month's up will be their free month. So we always, if there's 10 days left in a month where they started mid-month, make sure you take those days plus an entire next month. You need to get that money into the landlord's pocket. Okay, so tenant improvements, these can vastly vary. So in this case, this tenant, because it's a restaurant, he's got to do some improvements. Generally, and Shumei will be answering all the questions at the end, but what I've learned from her, and I probably only have the equivalent, there's so much to learn of an AA degree, I still need to continue learning every day. But on tenant improvements, a lot of times the landlord, if they like the client, they may, let them do some improvements that include flooring and additional stuff like that. But a lot of times they're looking for things that enhance the unit that the landlord can later use. So what could that be? That could be a new tonnage air conditioner, things of that nature. Maybe they're going to put in some counter space, things like that. And I'm going to let Shumei address the tenant improvement, because each case is different. And when you're writing the LOI, you need to have a conversation with your client and understand what they want to do to that unit. Sometimes it's a blank space. Other times, you have a fully built kitchen or something like that, or you can be renting a space that has a lot of offices that are pre-built from another tenant. The new tenant doesn't want those, so they're going to want that demised. So you have to have some tenant improvement money, and depending on the landlord's decision, they're going to either go with that rate or tell you what rate they're comfortable with. So when you are writing these for tenant improvement for your client, make sure that you are cueing the landlord in, that your tenant is aware that they're going to be making the improvements with a licensed contractor. That contractor needs to come in with their certificate of liability insurance, and they also need to come in with a copy of their contractor license prior to commencing work. These improvement plans, the tenant will normally submit them to the landlord before they break ground on any of the improvements. so that the landlord understands and can look it over. So your client should not just be starting work unless it was simply painting a wall, then it's probably fine. But if they're breaking, walls or anything like that, make sure that you're advising your client to get that approved by the landlord, to show them the plan first. Make sure your contractor's on board with his liability, his or her liability insurance, and their license. So when you're delivering the premise to the client, generally the landlord will warrant that the roof, electrical, HVAC, hot water heater, if applicable, are in good working condition. Now, another thing that Shumay and I have ran into, so we're very careful now to add it to every LOI, is we want that landlord warranting that that bathroom is ADA compliant. Now, why is that? Because if they're, ripping into a unit, the city's going to come inspect. And if that bathroom is not ADA compliant already, that could be a small bathroom. I think I heard an estimate of $8,000 to $10,000. It's not cheap. So if you are representing your client, make sure that you're throwing this in, that the bathroom is ADA compliant. You don't want any surprises for your client that it's not, and then the city tells them to make it ADA compliant. So normally, the landlord is going to warranty the HVAC unit for a certain amount of times. This one's pretty generous. I just threw in 3 years. It could be 1 year. It could be 2 years from the date of commencement of lease. So that means that after 3 years, then, the tenant needs to take care of that air conditioner. So it's a good thing to find out from the listing agent, how old is the AC? What is the tonnage on it? Make sure that's going to work for your client. Excuse me. And you always want to add in the unit is delivered and it's as is, where is condition. Okay, so you're delivering it that way. Now there's for commercial, there's always signage. So you always want to throw in the clause about signage. And why is that? Because the landlord wants to look at your signage. Maybe they don't want pink neon flashing signs on their, in their nice mall. So make sure that you are thoughtful in the design, and that your client understands that it's going to, at a minimum, require landlord's approval. And most landlords are okay with the signage. They're, unless, like I said, it's something really outrageous. And sometimes, where applicable, it could take the city's approval as well. So the tenant needs to observe the sign policies and rules of the landlord and city if that's applicable. You always want to make sure that the tenant understands that signs and installation are their sole responsibility and expense. The landlord is not participating in that cost unless that was something the landlord wanted to do and was open to that. So things are negotiable, but in most cases, Shumay will address this at the end with all of your questions. It is the tenant taking responsibility for that expense. Now, another thing that is very important is you want to make sure that they understand that the parking, because most of these units are going to be, in where there's a large parking lot. So you need to make sure that you are letting the client know, and this is also the LOI to the landlord, that they understand that the parking is offered on a first come, first served basis. Now, there are times where there may be some reserved parking. I know Shumay's working on one where she is trying to put in 15-minute parking so that the people can come and pick up food in those 2 15-minute slots. So if that were the case, you would simply add, however, landlord will, supply tenant with 2 15-minute parking spots for food delivery and pickup. Okay, so make sure that you're structuring the parking clause in this letter of intent the way it is. Utilities, make sure that you're also covering utilities. And this one, the tenant is responsible for utilities. One thing that I would add here, and I'm just thinking about it, and Shumay can correct me at the end if she thinks something different, check on the water, because sometimes the restaurant business or beauty salons or nail salons, they may be using more water. So where the landlord may have been supplying water to other units that don't quite use as much water, they may want to put a separate meter for water on the unit where they feel like the water usage is going to be too high. A lot of times the landlord will simply state that you can go up to a certain amount of water usage. If you go over that, and that'll be in the lease, then you're going to need to pay. So make sure that they understand that if they want a landline and internet service, that is their responsibility to get that provided. So the most important thing is, not the most important, but pretty important, to collect that money. So when you have the lease prepared, once the letter of intent will go out to the landlord, maybe the landlord doesn't like some of the terms, so they're going to in turn they're going to send a counter letter of intent, which is all non-binding. They're going to send it back to you. You're going to present it to the client. You may make 2 or 3 rounds on these counters. Hopefully it's only a couple of rounds, but it could be 2 or 3 rounds to get it so that the most important information is agreed upon. As you know, commercial lease documents can be lengthy. So you're just addressing the most pertinent things that to agree upon. So upon lease execution, you're going to draft that lease. The landlord's going to get a copy of that drafted lease, whether you're using a CAR form or AIR. And you're also going to send the tenant that drafted lease so they can review it. So tenant shall provide a cashier's check made payable to whatever your landlord's name, Miss Landlord, as itemized below. So you see here, I'm asking up front in this LOI, or I'm letting the landlord know that we will be providing the first month's rent, security deposit of $8,400, and the total amount of a cashier's check, nothing but a cashier's check, make sure we're getting cash for the landlord, is going to be $12,600. So prepare your clients when they come to, once the draft has been reviewed and landlord and tenant are in agreement, make sure they know to come prepared with that cashier's check for you. So tenant insurance. The tenant, this is really important, and each landlord may have their own requirement, but you always want to let the landlord know that you're prepared to provide the landlord with a certificate of insurance. In this case, we put of $1 million per occurrence. And also in that certificate of insurance, we want to name the landlord as an additional insured. And this is pretty standard. Your insurance agents know how to do this. This is no problem, but make sure that when you structure this in your letter of intent, you're letting the landlord know, hey, we're even going to name you as an additional insured, because it's probably already a requirement of the landlord and you've just addressed it up top. You need to have your client supply the certificate of insurance prior to move in. So we always make sure we're collecting it 2 to 3 days in advance. We don't want to give keys out unless they supply the certificate of insurance. It's very important for the landlord. Insurance is a big thing on commercial units. So agency disclosure, here we want to let all parties know. In this case, it's not always the case, but that Coldwell Banker George Realty is representing both parties, landlord and tenant. And we put a little clause, hereby advised to consult with their real estate attorney or their accountant, so they can go ahead and take the draft lease and consult with accountant or their real estate attorney of choice if that's what they wish to do. But we want to advise on the agency disclosure. Now, if it wasn't Coldwell Banker being dual on this, we would put the other, agency in here. So a lot of times when you're doing the letter of intents, the client or the tenant does not want to submit everything for landlord review. They want to submit this LOI, letter of intent. They want to see if they can agree on the pertinent conditions of the lease first. And then if everybody's in agreement and you've got the rates negotiated, the tenant improvements and things like that, then the tenant, you're going to collect the full application and credit report for landlord review. What we consider to be a full application is an application signed by each applicant, including the guarantor. We also want a copy of a government issued ID, which normally we grab a copy of their driver's license. The application is going to ask for their social security number. We're going to need that to run credit. We collect a fee of $30 to $40 to run the credit report. We don't do it ourselves. And we also ask if they're self-employed, we want 2 full years of tax returns submitted with that application. If they are employed, we want 2 to 3 months of the most current pay stubs. So what you also want to check is when the applicant, the client fills out the application, if they own a property, the landlord's going to be looking for that asset. So if they own a property, what Shimei and I do is we go in and we run title on that. And we provide that in the application package so that the landlord is clued in that, hey, they own this house or they own this building. So you always want to let the landlord know of those types of asset that the client may own. So you see here that I'm using the terms landlord and tenant. In your lease document, it's going to be lessor for the landlord and lessee for the tenant. I use the landlord and tenant, or Shimei and I do, to make it simple so nobody gets confused. Maybe the client isn't familiar with lessor and lessee, so we keep it to landlord and tenant in this document, okay? The other thing that you're going to want to make sure that you are advising your client, and this should be done right up top. We've had people ask about smoke shops in other areas, which the city had said no. Now the city's back on board with allowing smoke shops. So you want to advise the client to go ahead, check with the city. It's a simple call or a walk-in at most cities. Make sure that that business is going to be able to be licensed at that site. Sometimes, it could be under a CUP, conditional use permit. I'm not going to go into all the explanation of that, but a CUP could take 3 to 6 months from the city. So there's different things you would need to do in the LOI. And I want to show you something right here. So what we were talking about is this being non-binding. So you'll see this is what we put at the bottom of all of our LOIs. So it says this letter of intent is solely for discussion purposes only. Each party may discontinue discussions for any reason whatsoever without further liability one to the other. And we always put a valid, how long this is valid for. This letter is valid until June 14th, 2022 at 5 p.m. So just make sure you have your blurb at the bottom. We always make it a little bit smaller font, and so that you're covered that way. And you can feel very comfortable because, again, this is non-binding. You can kind of look at it and see how the landlord's going to respond, and then add any additional terms you may need to or respond to those. So if you are, I type this up, if you're representing the tenant, this is where you would add the commission. It would be up in the LOI. So let's say XYZ Real Estate Realty represents the landlord, and Coldwell Banker George Realty is representing the tenant. So you want to make sure you're covering your commission. Very important for us to get paid. So you're going to, maybe they won't pay you on an option, but you're going to write it in the LOI anyway. Don't put the amount. You don't want your clients to know how much you're being paid, but you can put commission shall be paid for initial 5-year and the first 5-year option term at 2.5%. Sometimes commercial brokers are members of the MLS. A lot of them aren't. They're on CoStar, they're on LoopNet. So you can be asking the other agent, hey, how much is the commission? And then make sure that you're putting it in to protect yourself. You don't put the amount, you just put how long the payment. Now the landlord could come back and say, no, I'm only paying you on the initial term. So that's a negotiation point. As Shimei says, on the options, you know, sometimes they pay, sometimes they don't, but on the first round, it does not hurt to ask, okay? So with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Shumei. We do have a list of types of commercial leases that we can share with everybody if they want a copy. But now I'm going to open it up, unmute yourself and ask Shumei or Peter questions, or if they have any comments on this presentation. Take it away. Any questions?
I just want to add that letter of intent is a two-end store. It can be used by the tenant as well as the landlord. You know, if the landlord, if you are representing the landlord, you can also approach a tenant and give them the letter of intent for initial the terms and conditions of the lease.
Yes. Are there any questions on letter of intents that Shumei and Peter can answer for you? Unmute yourself. We have a lot of participants today. So please unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have, or if you're in a letter of intent you have a question on, go ahead and ask us now. You have Shumei, who does quite a few letter of intents every year. So if you have questions for her, go ahead and throw them in the chat box or speak up.
Hi, Michelle, this is Steve. Just have a, I'm sorry. Just have a comment.
Okay.
Sometimes, you know, well, when we are dealing with the tenants improvement, and if this is I would say maybe a much larger scale,
Yeah.
sometimes I will put down so-called the lease commencement date and the rent commencement date. For instance, you know, if tenant is going to do a lot of tenant improvement, it could take them maybe 2 months or 3 months or even longer for them to perform this kind of improvement. Plus, they might need to go to the city or somewhere to get a permit.
Correct.
But without a disagreement on their hand, some of the cities, they say, okay, who are you? You don't have authority to do any kind of job because you are not the owner. So they should have some kind of disagreement on their hand to say, hey, look at that, you know, I got authority piece. And but you know, during this kind of tenancy improvement period, they are not generating any kind of income at all. So we usually, I will put down, say, hey, I give you the 3 months, or whenever you commence the business, you know, to start to pay the rent. That is the rent commencement date. Now let's come to one more issues, which is they say we are talking about this is the 5 years lease. Now, how do we deal about this 3 months? So if that is for instance, if we give the lease agreement, say, I give you 3 months of the tenancy improvement, TI allowance period, I will put down, say, 5+3. That means, you know, yes, the lease agreement, let's use the round number, say, starting from July 1st, but actually you starting paying the rent from October 1st. And the lease agreement has to be put down, say, the rent is going to commence from October 1st.
Yes.
And the lease will be expired, say, September 30th, is that 5 years and 2025 or something like that. Usually that is the way I'm going to handle that.
Yeah, and Shumei may have some comment on that because we do run into that quite a bit. Shumei, do you have any comment on Steve's?
Steve bring out a very good point. See, the commercial lease, sometimes it depends on the size of premises and also the demand. So it's all up to the lease between the landlord and tenant. So there's more things that you can throw in, like Steve mentioned. There's a rent commencement day and then lease commencement day. There's also like an early access, even though you don't have a lease signed or you have a lease signed, but you don't commit anything until that early access is done. So it's a lot of things to cover. Today, we just have a basic, tell you a step-by-step to how to get into commercial lease, LOI. This is first step. In the future, we will have more classes for you to cover different complicated lease term, okay? Commercial lease in commercial field is very nice. You know, you don't pay attention. This is a lot of bread and butter money for you. Commercial lease, once the landlord and the tenant sign the lease, you get paid. It's not like selling residential or selling commercial property. You have to wait for 30 days or 60 days escrow period and involved with the loan and also the appraisal report, all kind of thing. So just start getting into commercial lease, not the residential lease. Residential lease doesn't make you money, so let go. Concentrate on commercial lease, then you will know. You're not gonna regret. This is a good way to make money. All right, any more question about this beginning LOI?
Oh, go ahead. We have one in the room.
Yeah, on the
Talk loud.
tenant improvement.
Yeah. Come on over, Oscar. We're gonna put him up by the mic so he can.
Yeah, I
ask
can't
his
hear him.
question. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sure, may or Peter, on the tenant improvements, when they do the work, so the tenant pays for the work, and does he get any credit on the lease, on the rent? Or it comes out of his pocket and then he doesn't get reimbursed?
Okay, I answered that question. Normally, tenant improvement, they talk about the landlord reimburse or pay the invoice that the tenant received from the contractor, whatever. But sometimes landlord doesn't want to pay cash in front. They probably will say, oh, this is a landlord's option that I either pick up your invoice or I will give you rent credit. That means more free rent. So two ways to go.
Okay.
The reason is that because it's all depend on tenant experience. If you have a strong tenant, the landlord probably say, okay, I pick up you the construction bill, and then you sign off the mechanic lien, everything. So that's one way to do. But if you have a little bit weak tenant, for example, first time in business, whatever, the landlord probably will say, okay, I will give you tenant improvement, but that's not the cash in front. That will be rent credit in the future. So that will take care of both things.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions out there that we can answer?
Yeah, just to try to anchor what Sume said regarding the commercial lease. This is back a long time ago. The founder of Cushman and Wakefield, he makes money on commercial deals. He made millions of dollars on commercial deals and the commercial lease, not commercial sales.
Yeah.
So don't look down on these kind of commercial leases. Same of the landlord, they will pay you commission if you can find them a good tenant. Now the key thing is a good tenant. Okay? You have to look for a very creative. If I own a shopping center, if you can bring me a 7-Eleven, and this is 7-Eleven or even McDonald's or Starbucks, all these kind of creative tenant, if you can bring them to me, I will pay you commission, because these tenants will enhance the total value of the shopping center. You know, if you look at these kind of so-called some of us single tenant, and you may notice their cap rate is lower if that is a credit tenant. McDonald's, even the market right now, I rarely see any kind of McDonald's. Their cap rate is higher than 4. You know, quite a few of the McDonald's, their cap rate is 4 or under. So all of these kind of commercial leases, don't look down on that. Sometimes the landlord even will pay you the commission if the owner, if the tenants sign the option. And usually the way I handle that is, hey, if the tenant exercise the option, I don't charge the full commission.
Mhm.
I will charge maybe say, hey, my first 5 years or first how long the years, I would say I charge 2.5, okay? But when during the option period, I would reduce to say 1.25, 50%, you know, and only when they exercise the option.
That's
I have a
really
question
good.
for either Michelle or Shimei. Now, a lot of times the commercial lease has an option to renew for another 3 or 5 years. Now, in that case, do you get the commissions out of the option periods? And if you do, and how do you keep track of it? So that you won't, the tenant will not get out of the crack.
That's a good question. Okay, normally like a CBRE, they always charge the commission on the option renew. But later on, the landlord pretty much like don't want to pay the option to renew because like Steve said, this center with a good tenant, major tenant, whatever, maybe 5 or 6 years later, they're gonna sell the center with a good cap rate, and then they probably forgot that there's a portion of commission in the option that landlord has to pay. So that happens a lot of time. So most of the landlord or sophisticated attorney will say, okay, we're not gonna pay you commission in the renewal of option. Or if you don't think this is fair, then I pay you small amount, like a huge discount. For example, the commission on the option is 2 points or 2.5%. The landlord will offer 1% in the lease term. So that means the extra 1% in the lease term. So let's forget about the commission in the option. So it's all up to you, an agent, that you want to wait for the option time to nagging about the commission, or you want to get a little bit more pay in the lease term. Like my situation, I would just get the pay in front instead of wait 5 or 6 years later to renew the option in sometimes 10 years. I'm too old for that, so I just correct right now. Okay, so that answer your question, Mr. Kim?
In other words, you will affected in the commission for the option term, but a much lower rate than the regular commission, right?
Correct.
But what if the tenant never exercise the option? Then the landlord will have to pay you extra money for nothing.
But that's a landlord's choice. If they want to, give you the contract, say, okay, I pay you, but of course, when you get that pay, then you will never say, I'm going to return you the money later. And there's an awful case like you arrange 10 years lease. What happened if the tenant just made 2 years and the business is no good, they gone? So
That's
what
my
happened?
next question. Then what do you do with that?
You actually have if you read the AIR small print, that's it. Once you get a commission, you don't have obligation to pay back to the landlord. That's a contract over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but But in our society, like in this area, probably you don't want to do that because you're gonna see the landlord probably is a good friend, a good relative, or whatever. So the easiest way, what I do is I will tell the landlord, it's fine, but I'm going to re-rent again. And when I re-rent, I charge very little commission because since I got paid already, or something like that. It's negotiable, but normally landlord will pretty happy.
Yeah, I think overall it's better to be amicable with that landlord, and you have more business to come with him, in the leasing the arena. So it's better not to get get in bad term with the landlord, and maybe you can even offer to lease the property at for free for the rest of term, that's another option.
Yeah, that is true. And then I think Steve will agree with me. Lease sometimes is a window of the sale. Like you handle the lease for the shopping center. You pretty much know every detail of the shopping center, or you are acquainted with the management team in the shopping center. In the future, if the landlord wants to sell this property, who you think that he will go? Us, right? So this is a really good opportunity for you to get into. Right, Steve?
Yeah, totally agreed. And it's well, for our we are trying to establish a good relationship between the owner and you. And now Suman brought out another very key issue, which is the management. Now you have to be very careful. Some of the management company, they will steal your client. Yeah, so I come close to this kind of management company, couple times, and but what can you do? It's the judgment by the owner. So be careful on this kind of situation. It could happen.
That is true. That is true. Well, that's the part of our business. You can't get rid of that.
You cannot win all.
No.
Well,
Yeah.
but when you are representing the landlord sometimes after they acquire the property, they will ask you a recommendation for the property management company. So at that time, you can bring in your favorite property management company, and then maybe you should have a gentleman agreement with the management company saying that, hey, now you can do the management, but when it comes to sale, I'll be responsible for the sale. This kind of agreement is pretty popular in the industry.
Yeah, that's a good point that you can do that, but doesn't mean sometimes you have a pretty good relationship with the management company now, but later on people change. They change their attitude, or they sold the business to somebody. So it's a lot of area that you have to watch, but you can do all. So just do the best.
Yeah, Peter, you mentioned about a gentleman's agreement. Okay, not all the people are gentlemen. Okay, yeah, and the if I can do that, if I recommend, even I refer the management business to some agent, they come to me say, hey, please give me business. Then they betray me. Okay, so in United States, you are attorney, you know everything in writing. So I've done the lesson. Say, hey, next time if I ever recommend any kind of management company, of course, I will not recommend just one. But if I recommend any of them, I will put a side letter between this company and me. Say, hey, you are only handling the management.
Mhm.
for any sales or anything like that, it's me. Don't forget, I am the one who give you the business, you know.
Right, right.
And the tenants, I mean, this management company is having on me twice already.
That's a very good idea, Steve. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, you can't count on everybody being a gentleman nowadays, you know.
Yeah, that's the problem, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Let me check the chat box.
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Go, Anna has a question.
Shume, I noticed on some of your leases that you'll have where they'll give you half of the commission and then later on, they'll give you the
Mhm.
other half. And I think it has to do with once they move in or it's
Mhm.
leased. And maybe that's something that you want to share with them.
Okay, Michelle, can you repeat that question? Because it's.
Oh, okay. So she's asking because she's seen on the paperwork that when you when the lease is executed, you're only receiving half of the commission amount. And then at some point, she said she believes it's which is correct, when the business opens, you're receiving the other half of the commission. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay, this just happened recently after COVID, because a lot of business before COVID, they had a lease agreement, everything. And then the agent got paid already, but after the COVID, the business never opened. So the landlord think that this is not fair for me. I paid everything and then the tenant never opened. I lost a lot of money. So the landlord will ask us, you know, I lost the tenant, but also pay you the commission. So can we take it easy on the commission? So that's the way that we sort of like give landlord insurance that, you know, you'll be okay. So we get the half of the commission upon the both parties sign the lease, and then half the commission when the tenant open for business. So that will actually solve a lot of problem. It's just the way I think maybe will help, because sometimes at the beginning, once you sign the lease, by law, you should collect all the commission. But that is the most difficult time for the landlord sometimes. Landlord has to pay TI, has to update the property, this and that. And then the deposit, the security deposit in first month's rent, the money they receive, landlord receive upon signing the lease, probably not enough to pay your commission at that time. So what you can do is just give them a break.
Thank you, Shume.
Okay.
To collect the commission, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, we have an invoice that we prepare. And if you have a lot of commercial leases out there, as Shume does, we keep an Excel spreadsheet so we know what's outstanding, what's due. But you create an invoice, and Shume can share that another day, like how that works, or we can share that in training as so that you know how to bill for your commission. Is there, there's a question in the chat box. It says, are there any particular websites to search for commercial leases besides the MLS? Does CBGR have an in-house commercial lease listing platform that we can see?
Okay. Normally, I would suggest you start with the AIR lease. AIR lease is prepared by a bunch of attorney, and quite often they change the term and everything. So, and then the AIR side has a different lease. They pretty much give you a good idea that the net lease, gross lease. If once you review all the lease from AIR, then you about 80% know what's going on. Even CBRE, sometimes the language is from AIR.
Yeah.
I think AIR is a really good site for commercial lease. And Steve and I, we both use that a lot. It doesn't mean that you have an attorney, then you will have a perfect lease. Sometimes, you know, attorney has to be really understand the lease. So I would say ARR is a good place that you start learning commercial lease.
And you can, and remember, as we've announced a few times, you can buy the suite of AIR documents now through CAR. I believe it's $199 annually.
Yes.
That is one heck of a deal.
Yeah, that's a good advantage.
Oh man, it's great because, you know, for $199 a year, you could buy that suite and start familiarizing yourself with the lease documents.
Yeah. And also you don't need to pay a token fees.
Yeah.
And that saves you a lot of money too, because even if you belong to the AIR and when you're
Yeah.
using the AIR forms, and when you print it out, you have to pay the token fees,
Mhm.
which may cost you like $10 per contract.
That's
And
right.
then if you're making a lot of commercial leases, it will add up, you know. But if you use the AIR CRE form for using it with the car forms, it's free, and you only have to pay the $199 per year, and that will pay for all your forms from the ARR.
And we have a question. Go ahead.
Actually, a comment. Let me ask a question again. Will you become a member of ARR for the one that they're talking about right now? When you pay once a year, they will also teach you, they have classes every day at 10 o'clock in the morning for
Yeah.
the new members.
Yes.
I'd like to mention that.
Okay, thank you. That's really nice. And Ray, you want to know where to search for leases? Where to look, what websites to look for rather than just MLS? There's,
A good place to search for is the LookNet and also CoStar too.
yeah,
So if you are a member of the LookNet or CoStar, you can start searching for that in those areas. And if you need help on that, I can hook you up with Dennis Lee, who's the representative for LookNet and also CoStar. And as a matter of fact, they're going to have a seminar next week, the third Wednesday of the month, when we have commercial meetings at 11 o'clock. So if you want to know more about it, be sure you tune in next week. Okay, on the 15th at 11 o'clock. It's also going to be a lunch and learn type of thing. You can come to the meeting room, or you can attend by Zoom. Okay, so that's next week.
Thank you.
Next.
Yes, thank you. We'll meet you there.
Okay, great.
so if, is there any other questions?
It's very good. I think it's very good meeting. Everybody has a chance to talk, and it's open forum and a lot of good and educational information. So very good, Michelle. Good job.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for Shumei and Peter's participation, and we'll continue on because there's so much to learn. So we have to do it, as Shumei said, piece by piece.
Yes.
So we'll continue on, but yeah, thank you, everybody.